Hello and welcome to the Season 2 retrospective of the Bazaar, where we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff. I'm a big fan of Magic the Gathering, and one of my favorite content creators is Marshall from Limited Resources. And if you're familiar with any of their sunset reviews of different sets, that's kind of what we're going to be doing here today. So what I want to go over is kind of my overall journey this patch, what that looked like, give an overview of what the big patch changes meant in Season 2, kind of for the game in its totality, and how those affected the meta. I also want to talk about character fluctuations, seeing how all the different characters changed throughout the meta. I thought was pretty interesting, and I'm hesitant to crown a champion of the meta or the one that was the most powerful, but we'll see as we look at them. Then I want to go to the community comments. I put out a post recently asking for you all for your experience in Season 2 and going to share some insights there. And then I'll give my overall thoughts of Season 2 and kind of what I want for Season 3 of the Bazaar. So to begin, I quickly wanted to take a look at my personal journey here through Season 2. I've made a little bit of a spreadsheet for myself so that I could track basically what heroes I was playing, how I was winning, what builds I was playing, and any notes that I had for the different builds. I probably should have put dates here, but I'll do that for Season 3. Regardless, you can see that I played a lot of Pig. I mostly played Pig throughout the season here. Played a little bit of Vanessa, second most for sure, and then goes Mac, then Dooley. I think overall, what we found in the beginning was that the pig items were pretty powerful, and a lot of the builds that were viable in season one and even the beta were not necessarily as viable here in season two. Thinking about Kiowas and things of that nature, where you're like value stacking, it wasn't as effective. Generally speaking, a lot of the builds that I played on Pig were drum builds or weapons builds, which is just kind of something that we didn't have access to very much in the other seasons outside of like Square Pig, where you're playing a lot of medium weapons and Crook. Other than that, playing Mac, I think the biggest builds here were like the Peace Rot builds and the Self Poison builds were very powerful, and it kind of, I don't know, it not to say it made other Mac builds less viable, but it definitely felt like that was the main way that you should be playing Mac if you wanted to get to those 10 wins. The biggest takeaway here is, it took me 74 games to get to Legend, which is, I want to say, a little higher than I thought it would be. My 10 win percentage was just below 35%, which used to be a little bit higher here. So I know also a lot of these, as you can see, it's just excruciating sometimes when you're climbing the ladder and you're playing the same things over and over and over again because you think they're good. But I think that's one of the big things that I want to work on with this next season is that I don't really want to just play the same builds to hit Legend. I want to try and have more fun with the game and have a more varied experience. Just jumping in game for a second, I did hit Legend, and that was really cool and all that good stuff, but it was certainly a grind. I've put about over 400 hours into the game here, about over 500 runs, and which is kind of crazy to think about how this is sort of a small number compared to a lot of like other content creators and legend players and things of that nature. I wish they had the match history feature, but I guess they'll add that at another point. I know that you can go in here and see your 10 win percentage um, across your different heroes. And as you can, with many people, see that probably with their Vanessa and all these earlier on, they're taking the total 10 win percentage of all the games that you've played. So those numbers are going to be a little skewed compared to the current patch. So maybe they'll add that. But overall, I was, can we see here? Okay, I was gonna say, can we maybe break it down, but we can't. That's okay. Uh, with all this sort of stuff, I am feeling still like I'm having fun with the Bazaar, but definitely hit a point where I was burnt out here. I'm also want to talk a little bit about the rank up rewards. It's a really large time investment to get to legendary, and it really is more so a time investment than anything else. And I would love to see some other more unique level up rewards for if you were to hit these different tiers here, things that kind of make it feel a little bit more special for each certain one. There's so many different rugs and cosmetics, but this is not me trying to complain about season two, so let me just keep it moving forward. I want to talk about the patch notes and how the game has progressed overall here in season two. It was pretty interesting. The first thing we were met with was a different way to rank up here. So we were getting a lot more points earlier on when we were able to hit 10 wins. So it really rewarded a lot of early 10 wins until you got to diamond tier, and then it was just kind of the same old point system that you were working before. So theoretically, it was easier to get to legend if that was your goal. But regardless, I think players in general are just becoming more aware of the different strategies in the game. They're getting better, so the climb is not necessarily easier. With channels like this and with content swimming around in all sorts of forms, more knowledge is just out there about in the game on how to be good. So it wasn't an easy climb to to legend, I'll say that much, and I imagine it was the same for you all, as people have some pretty good builds out there. But some other big things here, we got the Max Dangerous Experiments and we got Pygmalion's Investment Opportunities expansion. These were two really impactful expansions that I want to get into a little bit deeper. So for Mac, I remember when we first saw these items, it was kind of hard to evaluate how good each of them was in a vacuum, but it kind of came down to them really being in a vacuum in some way, because you wanted to play a lot of these items together. You really wanted to play your adrenal converter with pretty much all of these things. This was a cornerstone piece of the build, which I think people pretty early identified that this was going to be a good item. Optical augment, I think it could maybe have a place, but we haven't found it yet. But the rapid injection system, the test subject alpha, and the wild quillback, it was not trivial, but it was pretty easy to find ways to negate the self poison that you were doing or make it worth your while, where you're getting so many different poison triggers, gaining a lot of different regen, things of that nature, that these items became way more easy to use. I don't want to say more powerful, but they were kind of more straightforward to use in a build compared to a lot of what Mac does. I feel like Mac is a fun hero because you can find some really fun synergies that play together when your weapons get enchanted from your reagents. And this build doesn't really need you to do any of that. You kind of just have the cookie cutter build of getting a rapid injection system, putting a spider mace next to it, and maybe like a barb claws. You have an adrenal converter. That's kind of all you need. Maybe you'll put like this venomous dose on board. But yeah, this whole package here kind of felt like a self-contained build. You could mix and match all these different items, maybe outside of the piece rot, and you'd be sitting pretty and enjoying the power that your build brought. Um, I I want to just thinking about the other builds here. I'm not necessarily sure that we've seen something so all in like this outside of like the dually bugs in terms of other expansions. We got freeze from Pygmalion, and that kind of augmented the freeze that he already had. Vanessa, the aquatic items didn't necessarily all go together in one separate build, but this was kind of like an all-in-one package that you pick up these items and you're in a good spot. In terms of design and things of that nature, I think that for newer players, I would have recommended you pick this up just because it is nice to have some signposts and just say, okay, I can just pick one, two, three, and then I'm in a pretty good spot. I think overall for the game diversity and things of this nature, I wasn't a huge fan of it by the end of the season, just because I had done it enough times to feel like I had kind of seen what I needed to see. But we did get a really interesting item in the Peace Rot, which doesn't necessarily fit in with these builds. And we saw this change over a couple iterations. The Peace Rot initially was, I think, a bad item, but one that could be very powerful. And then it actually gave you economy. And then it had a really low cooldown. And then they increased the cooldown on it, as we'll see. And it is in a place right now where I think it can still be good, but it wasn't nearly as powerful as it was. But all of this didn't really matter in the beginning of the patch because we had some really, really broken things coming from Pygmalion. So I love at the beginning of the patch, they generally, at least with the new season, will just do a ton of numbers changes on stuff, make items more interesting with different varied builds and stuff like that. And the big standout one was definitely the lemonade stand. It gained regeneration equal to 5% of your max health for the fight. And with its cooldown, that was kind of insane. Also, with its enchantments, that was even more insane. Because we can see here in its current iteration where it's going to, you know, do damage equal to that 5% of the regen, poison, burn. And we were seeing players basically take this and then you didn't have to value stack it at all. You just did an obscene amount of damage by playing a regular Pygmalion game, and it had a much lower cooldown than this. It had a 7-second cooldown at that, so at that 7-second mark, you kind of just you didn't instant kill your opponent, but it was pretty darn close. And this also worked really well with the Hogwash, which also healed equal to your max health. And then it also charged on a regeneration trigger, or it got this when you get a regeneration trigger, so it just worked with more items, which was really cool. And then the enchantments on it basically said whenever you heal or whenever you gain regeneration, do X. So you could put fiery on this thing, you could put poison, you get a new Washawali bird on board, and you have a very potent both defensive and offensive build. And I think those are kind of the builds that are the most frustrating in the Bazaar, the ones that can play both good offense and defense. There's just not a lot of counterplay to that sort of thing. So that was really where like the first 3 days of the meta ended up, is just, okay, do you see a pig? You're probably dead. There wasn't much you can do. And thus we didn't really know how powerful the new Mac items were. But as it turns out, when all this got nerfed, that Mac build was pretty darn good. Let's look at those other Pygmalion items too that were released in this expansion. So I really enjoy Pygmalion. It's my favorite hero. I've been pretty open about that. I really liked the new weapons at the beginning, or the new items at the beginning, because you could play weapons builds. The showcase alone was one of the most potent enablers that we have had for a Pygmalion early game in the entirety of the Bazaar. It really allowed you to put pretty terrible weapons on your board, which is kind of like Pig's whole point, is you have a lot of things that don't do a lot until you use something to either give them damage or scale them in some sort of way. But the showcase, the numbers on it were actually nerfed. So it used to do give your weapons 20 damage and 20 shielding. And on a 5-second cooldown, giving all your weapons 15 and giving all your shield 15, or 20 as it were, it's still good now, is a lot. You can think about Shark Claws, which is going to give your board at bronze tier 10 damage, each of your weapons. The showcase, sure, it's not doing damage, but it has the potential to give even more stats to your board if you put shielding items on there too, which is not very difficult. And we got some good enablers for that, like the Wrist Warrior and things like that, and also the Bad Blocker. And overall, we went from a place where Pygmalion had terrible early game to one of the best early games in the game, which on a hero that is also built around having a pretty potent late game, even though I agree with people who say that Pygmalion's late game is not like the strongest or the best always. I think Vanessa still has some really credible late game builds in that capacity in Mac too. Pygmalion generally is playing to the late game, so you're going to have some pretty like one-shot kill builds on Pygmalion and stuff like that. And there is a tension in a design sense with that. When you have a good early game and a late game, you don't have weakness as a hero. So early on in the patch, I found that I was winning with Pygmalion a lot, and they didn't really nerf a lot of the good Pygmalion items from before. I think a lot of it just got power crept out into where we are now. I'm thinking about specific things like the value stacking build. Actually, I rescind that. I rescind that completely because I think about my boy Ledger, who got nerfed into the ground, and thus it made it really hard to value stack your items and things like that. But you just didn't need to kind of commit to that end game anymore. You had ways to play early. We also see like 28-hour fitness, which pairs really well with the showcase, but also this really all is to say that the real king here that made it out and was the best item from Pygmalion in Season 2 is the drum. So I'm sure you saw this a lot in the Bazaar, and they did nerf the numbers on it because it was so good. You had a viable way to play a lot of small weapons early, and you weren't losing early, so you had pretty good economy, and the drum was already good before, so you kind of had this natural build progression where you just got a showcase. Maybe you found a 28-hour fitness, that's cool too. And then if you didn't find the drum, you had a viable build still because 28-hour fitness existed. But if you did find the drum, your build just was pretty clean. You get like a yo-yo, and a yo-yo with any set of weapons was just potent enough to propel you to the late game. Probably enough to get you to 7 wins realistically, and not always 10 wins with that, but this was kind of the big winner, I would say, for Pygmalion in Season 2 over the entirety of the patch after the regen and healing stuff got nerfed. So it's kind of interesting to see how that all progressed. But we also got some other items from Pygmalion. I think the Coin Cure wasn't particularly potent, but we had some really interesting builds that you could play with Hyper Greens, with bad blockers. Ring King Gauntlets was just kind of the showcase thing, but with the Rice Baller, the Pen FT was a super interesting item. It wasn't as powerful as I thought it'd be, just because I think the value stack builds were way less impactful, but it was just a 2-second cooldown small item. That in its own right, regardless of what it does, maybe if it dealt damage to you, that would not be viable, but just a thing that goes off quickly on Pygmalion is something that we didn't really have a lot of access to outside of like an Adlotl that was already super high level, or the yo-yo itself. So this Pen FT was a really cool enabler that we could utilize to do some pretty fun stuff. Overall, I really enjoyed this expansion, and I'm excited to see what they do in the future expansions. I believe the next 2 expansions, I know one is at least going to be Mac, and I think the other one is going to be Dooley from what I have seen so far. So I don't think that we're going to get a Vanessa and Pygmalion expansion, at least from the information I have now, and I'm recording this video on May 30th. So things could definitely change in that time, and I'll put out an update on that. But yeah, overall, I like these, and I think that these were a good addition to the game, even though they kind of homogenized a lot of the early game for Pygmalion. And then looking at some of the other heroes, at the beginning of the patch, Vanessa got 2 items where she got the custom scope, which I don't think people really understood its power until they started playing the Eels builds later in the game, where you basically had an Eels, you had like a Crow's Nest to give it lifesteal, and then you had like an Orange Julian that you would charge whenever your Eels went off because you had this custom scope. I think that's where people started figuring it out. 1 weapon builds still were okay. They were not incredible, but they were okay. Definitely 10 win worthy in this season of the Bazaar. There wasn't as much dually bugs builds going around that kind of made you unable to play any 1 weapon build. So the nerfs on, I think, on the bugs build were pretty effective. I think it's in a much better place than it was before, and especially with the new items, you're able to beat it pretty effectively. Again, thinking about like an Eels build, or even if you got Caltrops, or there's a lot of very viable Mac builds still that could just out damage and outperform the Friends build. So I think that ended up in a good spot. But yeah, the 1 weapon builds really just turned into 1 eel builds towards the last like week or week and a half of the patch, which was interesting to see. And the other cool item that we got was Tortuga, which I really enjoyed. Tortuga was also initially pretty insane. It had more damage than this, and it had a lower cooldown. I think it might have had slightly lower. We'll check that in a second. But yeah, it had way more damage. 100 more damage is a lot. And then yeah, with 300, 600, 900 was kind of pretty crazy. Yeah, higher cooldown. But this item was super impressive and is continuing to be impressive. It also plays into kind of one theme that I see on Vanessa, where you have your runs really build around and rely on a lot of the large items in the game. You don't necessarily need to, I guess, with like the elemental depth charge and with the shark claws. But outside of that, I feel like a lot of these really wanted one of your large items. So Vanessa, your runs felt very different if you didn't get in a large item vendor, if you didn't see one of these large items. These are just huge signposts, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think it's just kind of an observation. I'm interested to see what they do with new items that are coming out from here. If they kind of continue what I think is a theme, but others may not, where the large items are very important on Vanessa. All this is an aside. The Tortuga was pretty fun to build around just because you also wanted to play a lot of these cool, fun friends, and you, with your friends' builds, generally wanted to go for like a Sea Dog Saloon. Maybe you'd get like an old Salt Claw where you would really try and capitalize off these haste and slow triggers. You could also do something with like Mr. Hendrix, is it? That's not Mr. Hendrix, that's a Netrunner card. Mr. Richardson. There you go, I was close. Uh, but yeah, you could build around like this and put an enchantment on it, which was pretty fun. I just overall I'm kind of a fan of the Tortuga builds, and Tortuga I think is fun. You just it enables your board with that haste trigger, and it also works really well with a lot of these friends that you may not necessarily feel like you can play outside of like a Sea Dog Saloon build. Regardless, I think where we ended up with a lot of the more powerful builds was, at least at the end of the patch, with the electric eels. And I think this was really a response to a lot of the Pygmalion drum builds. The eels was very good against that. Also was pretty good against a lot of what Dooley does, where you have weapons, or not weapons, but items that go off very quickly. And then against other weapon spam builds from Vanessa, the electric eels is very good when you give this thing life steal. So it was a pretty good build that we got in the last week, week and a half. It's something that is pretty susceptible to like one-shot builds from Pygmalion, or even like a Staff of the Moose build from Mac, something like that. But we, I don't think, got to that point in the meta where people were starting to pivot and really try and respond to this. It's always interesting in the Bazaar because you don't know who you're going to fight against, and they could have any sort of build. But if you think you're going to play against the Electric Eels builds at least 3 or 4 times, if you have a build that counters it, well, that's 3 or 4 wins for you. So it's worthwhile to build into things that are good against what other people are doing, even though you can't guarantee that you're going to be facing up against this. I mean, outside of that, like all of the builds on Vanessa, I thought were really viable. There were just so many items that she had that still continue to perform. I think people saw the power of the Arbalist in this patch along with Shark Ray and really took advantage of that. Ballista needs to be faster, but that's okay. But yeah, overall, I thought that also the Cannonade I think was really good in this patch too. Yeah, Vanessa just was really fun to play. There was a lot of directions you could go. Yeah, you could just play Shark Claws, and that was pretty easy to do, but you had a lot of points to pivot from there, and I thought that that was really important. Like, you can have maybe the tier one or like most powerful optimal build for winning early on, and that's all well and good for me if that only lasts for like 2 or 3 days. I get that something is, and by 2 or 3 days I mean that in game. Um, that's fine if they fall off in power and you're incentivized to play other more powerful things. When that doesn't happen, and I think this is exactly the problem that we saw with like the Dooley Bugs build from last season, is that the runs become very stale. You just get your bugs. You just get, in what was before this also Shark Claws, and you just get your 7 or 8 wins, find some enchantment, or find some weapon to get you 2 more wins, or like some powerful synergy, and all your runs start looking the same. This is unfortunately, I think, kind of what happened with me with a lot of the Pygmalion builds this run in Season 2, and I'm glad that they nerfed the drum because I think that going Showcase in a drum was just too good and too clean and easy. It's also pretty easy to get Yo-Yo and stuff like that. You can see here, this item was, if you saw this, you just pick it up. It's also, maybe like 2 gold to pick up at bronze and stuff like that, but this was just too important, this meta, with how good the drum was if you wanted to get 10 wins. But, that's only one way to play. Not everyone is trying to go for the optimal build every single time, and for those people, I'm jealous. I'm envious of your ability to just have fun with things. I over-optimize the fun out of everything, and I guess that's why I'm here on YouTube. But yeah, overall, I I had fun with Pig, but towards the end of the season with the grind, it was kind of difficult. Jumping back to the patch notes here, and oh, this is Mobilytics, not the official patch notes. Here we go. I do like Mobilytics though. They have some good patch notes and articles, and I appreciate them kind of picking up the, I don't want to say slack, I don't want to say slack, but just picking up where Tempo left off with some patch notes and that sort of stuff for a couple weeks. Regardless, Dooley was interesting. I They just did like the core redesign at the end of season one, which I thought was awesome. And I still think it's so sick. I love how that plays now. I think it's way better than it was before, where you sometimes just pick a core and you're like, okay, I got the friend core. Well, I didn't get any friends. So what am I supposed to do with this thing? And then you just wish you could sell it off, and eventually they allowed you to do so. Uh, but now Dooley, you can kind of build to the core, and that definitely gives Dooley a different way to play. And I think all the cores are pretty viable. So I like where all that ended up. In terms of what they gave Dooley with new things, I mean, we got Virus, which was cool for like 3 days, and then it kind of became old and they nerfed it. I don't have still yet to see a forklift build that works, even though that they did change this item. I'm sure there is one that is viable. Hologram projector, it's a cool item, but not really anything to write home about. Just copies one of your items at the end of the day. So, it didn't feel like we got a lot for Dooley this patch, and thus I personally, as you may have saw in the spreadsheet, just didn't spend a lot of time playing Dooley. I'm curious, how many games did I play? Back to my spreadsheet. Dooley. Dooley. 3. Did I really only play 3 Dooley games? Did I really only play 2 Dooley games? Wow. That's insane. I got a 10 win on one, so that's cool. Okay. I genuinely thought I had played more, but I was pretty honest with this. There's a lot of zeros and threes and twos, and I didn't want. There was a part of me that's like, don't put it out there. You need to save face, but it's like, nah, like who cares? This is reality. I'm a man on YouTube. It doesn't matter. But yeah, didn't play a lot of Dooley this patch, and I mean there wasn't really that much exciting stuff to do with Dooley this patch, I thought. So yeah, Dooley was not not well represented in this patch, so I'm excited to get more Dooley items. And I'm sure Dooley's fun. It's just I didn't really feel like trying it out. Anyway, some big changes we also got were monster updates, and I really hope that they continue with this trend. They switched up the monsters in a lot of places so that they had different items or that they had different rarities, and just overall made this loop a lot better. And we'll discuss in a second one other big change that they made to this, but I really enjoy them switching up the PvE encounters. You're always going to have, something random in your PvP encounters, but when you can reliably kind of just on vibe say, oh, I can win that fight, I can win that fight, the game gets a little less interesting in my opinion. So just having variety here felt really good, and I hope that they continue to do that in the next season. Another interesting thing here they did is they changed Mountain Pass, and overall they in another later patch they reduced the amount of XP that we got. So you were playing in a way where you were just gaining way less XP, and because of that, you also saw, or one change that they made rather, was that we can look at it. The monsters now gave way less XP. So you had the same amount of gold, but it was only diamond and legendary monsters that actually gave you 3 XP. Because the general play pattern was that you would go to the tiny furry monster, which also was changed to not have any XP event for you, and then you would try and win that, or you would get like a food or a toy or whatever to appease the tiny furry monster to give you some XP, and then you would go and fight the strongest fight on the day, which was the Warrior. Before that was the Rogue Scrapper. And with that, like, you just had this kind of loop where you're like, doesn't matter who I fight. The best thing I can do for myself is to go and just fight the strongest enemy that day. It got pretty boring for me. I didn't like just saying like I don't need to care about any single item or thing that these monsters could give me. I just want to go and get XP because having the HP difference between my opponent and myself and getting the level 10 earlier was more powerful than any item the game could give me. So it was a good change. I'm going to say it. It felt weird at first, but I really liked this. It made it so that when you went to your monster fights, you really had to think about what we were doing, why we were doing it, what items we really wanted to get, and it made you really think like, okay, well this monster has 4 items I want, this one has 5 items I want, but that one who has only 4 items I want, if I get that one item, that's going to feel really good. And yeah, it made you think way more about the PvE fight. So I think this was a really good change. And also it kind of leveled the playing field a bit where if you had someone who just got a strong build early and then they were able to defeat all the gold tier monsters, then they were probably in a position where they are going to win more of their fights compared to their opponents just because of the XP advantage. So I think that that was really good overall. And what else from these patches? We had a lot of these like start of turn, or yeah, start of turn I guess is fine. Again, I come from card game background, so start of turn triggers where you did something immediately when the round started. um, I I think this was a pretty frustrating point for a lot of people in that before the change, where now that they go off when you use an item. Before that, it was like, okay, I have a really strong build. My opponent has a really strong build. Oh, they were high rolled the haste skill. I lose. It just wasn't very fun. Again, we can't control what our opponents are doing or what they bring to the board, but it feels really bad when they got something that you'd also tried to get, or they got something that gave them like a 1 second advantage on a skill, and that was the reason that they won that fight, even though that you had like scrapped together a really good board and you were trying to, find some really powerful synergies, and you finally do it and it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like they just hasted their items for 2 seconds and it just completely negated everything that I did. So I really liked this change. I thought that this was super, super impactful. Um, Other changes that they made that I also really liked, of course, they fixed the hogwash lemonade stand and everything of this nature, was with the starting HP. And I believe that was here. Yes. So at the May 21st, so again, I'm recording this on the 30th, so it was 9 days ago, they increased all heroes starting health by 50. I really like this. They have talked about already how they wanted to slow the game down. I know we haven't heard from Reynad in a while, as he deliberately made that choice to talk to the community less. And he was saying that they had been trying to figure out ways to make the game a little bit slower. So I mean, they literally increased the cooldown of most of the items in the game by 1 second, and that was, I think, initially it was like, oh my god, first aid, and no, please. But it was good. I think it was good overall. It maybe added, like I don't know, 30 minutes or an hour overall to our life or something like that. We're just waiting for our weapons to go off in the bazaar. But slowing the game down, I think, made a lot of sense. And it allowed you to play more different builds, I want to say, instead of things that just went off too quickly. So kind of just evened everything out a little bit. Um, Overall, I think also adding 50 HP to everyone, including Mac. Mac originally started with a very low starting life total. I believe it was 200. Starting with 50 max HP, and I believe he's now at that 250 or 300 even, is it? Regardless, just getting more feels good. I think in the Bazaar, like all the heroes really do have viable early, mid, and late games, which is nice to see. We're kind of in a pretty, like, I want to say we're in a pretty balanced place, honestly, and it might feel stale to me just because I've played a lot of it, but ultimately I like how the games are going a little bit longer, in that if someone still gets like a grenade and it gets a crit chance off, you don't just immediately lose that fight and stuff like that. So overall, I really appreciated that change, and I think that they're really dialing in on a very good place in the Bazaar. I feel like everything is a lot more balanced and fun. I know that I had to take a break a little bit in the middle of the season just because I needed to have some time away from the game, but I'm invigorated for season three. I think it'll bring some good stuff, to just have new items and things of this nature. And if they keep making these changes that may seem small, that ultimately refine the game to be more fun, and I want to say more balanced, that'll be, I think, good for everybody. So yeah, I kind of talked about it when we're talking about those different patches, but just to sort of summarize the characters, I feel like Pig in the end of season two here is very strong. One that has a lot of different viable builds, but generally speaking, the weapons builds seem a lot easier to pull off than like the value stacking and heal builds, although that the heal builds, because it's cleansing poison and burn and stuff like that, feel really good. Oh yeah, I think that was something failed to mention. It's funny because this is maybe the biggest change to the game. Uh, Heal now cleanses 10% of burn and poison. So whether you're using lifesteal on your weapons or healing naturally through other means, you are cleansing burn. So this was really, I think, a much needed change. Um, Before in season one, burn builds were just kind of insane. There's nothing you can do, there's no counterplay to it. If an opponent had a burn build, sure, you could try and go shields, and that was cool, but generally speaking, the burn builds were going to do more damage than you could ever shield, just based off the numbers and how burn ticks every 2 seconds. So having ways to cleanse burn and poison also made the PvE encounters much more interesting, where if you were like behind on XP but then you saw a diamond tier encounter that was based off around burn damage or poison damage, well, maybe you couldn't win your PvP fight with your healing build, but you could win your PvE fight because you had the ability to cleanse a lot of that burn and poison. So I thought this was super important and a super big change, one that I'm really happy with, and it makes the game more fun to me personally, just because you have more viable builds, and it makes you think about the game in a different way. Where before it was like, well, my heal just only is going to try and I guess counteract the damage that was done to me. But if it also has this added effect of reducing the status effect triggers that you can get, or status effects that you can get, I think that that's really cool. So it made healing much more viable, and people were certainly calling for that. So definitely love that they did that for the game. But yeah, Pig was pretty strong, had a lot of cool builds that you could do, whether it was defensive or offensive. Love where he ended up, and one of my favorite heroes continues to be one of my favorites. The value stacking builds are less viable, but I think that that's okay because it's more fun to actually play in the middle and early portions of the game and not just lose all the time. Mac, I think Mac was certainly very strong, especially in the middle of the patch when people started to really understand that the new items were super potent, and you saw like a lot of the toxin injector, adrenal converter builds, things of this nature, that self poison build. I think Mac overall had still a lot of viable builds that you could go. The regen builds were still pretty fun and cool, but ultimately, I think a lot of the builds that we saw when we were playing were facing against Max, or even if we were playing Mac, utilizing that self poison build. But it was fun. It's just there's not a lot of variation on it, and because of that, that can get a little stale. But either way, Mac was in a pretty good position this patch. Vanessa, I think, was maybe the strongest hero throughout the entirety of this patch, I want to say. Just because Vanessa, one, everyone has access to Vanessa when they get the game. So you're going to be facing a lot of Vanessa naturally in the Bazaar. But the other thing is that Vanessa has so many viable builds that it feels really fun to play Vanessa. You don't necessarily know where you're going to end up in your run. And I know I have a run that I think I'm going to post on Monday where I had like three very good builds that were in front of me, and I could have gone into any single one of them, and they could have all got me to 10 wins. And spoilers, one of them did. And it felt good to just be like, man, there's so many cool, powerful options that I could toy with. But it's really up to me to figure out how to optimize this. So that was like just a really cool and fun way to play the game, where it's not just like, okay, what did the game feed me? Okay, well, I haven't really gotten anything. I've seen like 6 out of my 10 items that I've seen in these shops, or like, I guess let's just say like a third of the items I see are actually viable, and 2/3 of them don't do anything. It's nice to look at a shop and be like, what's powerful? And what do I want to do? Not what do I have to do? So I thought that that was really cool. And then Dooley, again, I didn't play a lot of Dooley, as you saw. So I'm not going to say too much about Dooley. Overall, I think I'm just excited to see what new items that they add in the latest patch. And I'm excited to see what other content creators put out there. And that's generally how I learn, is I see someone do a build and I go, okay, cool. Well, that's kind of how you do that. Now I want to try and see if I can do that myself. So excited to see what other people do, because I know for sure I'm not so good at theory crafting on Dooley, but I'm excited to get better at that. And now I want to go into something new that I did, where I put out a post and I just asked y'all, what do you think of season 2? And before I go into who was on here, I'm going to put this out there. I put in here that I would talk about it and share the comments in my next video. If you would like for your name to be redacted and things of this nature, just let me know and I'll go ahead and remove that section of the video. But I do want to talk about the comments because I really enjoyed speaking with you guys and getting the feedback from you all. Also, Incoherent, one of these YouTube creators over here, someone that I watched a bit, and their dog passed away not long ago, so I just wanted to send my regards to you. I know that is horrible, and yeah, just hoping that you're doing okay. Regardless, want to talk about some of these comments here. Yeah, I'll start from the bottom and move upwards here. So, when just asking people, basically, what they thought of season two here. Not my kind of beer. Weird balancing, felt less unique, more forced builds, and way too hard power creep. I thought that power creep was a really interesting one. It's something that I didn't really think about when I was just in season two until I saw it here from McGullup. I want to say her name is. But that's real. It's very real. I think about Mac and it's like, yeah, that new set that we got from Mac, those items had frankly way bigger numbers than a lot of the other Mac items that we've seen so far. So like it really felt like things got power crept out. Pygmalion again, we can think about like value stack builds. Those value stack numbers, all the things that got nerfed there now makes it so that those builds feel way less viable. And yeah, it encourages us to play new builds, which I think is good, but I still want to be able to go back and play some of the builds that I like, but it's not to say that they won't change that. But overall, I definitely see that power creep and totally see where you're coming from. Like the balancing was weird, and I I like where it ended up at the later portions of the patch, but I think to get there, it definitely took some iterations. Um, Obviously, when the patch first drops, I think it's like, okay, everyone looks to see what's the most broken thing that I can do. They do that. It's nerfed in 3 days, and then we actually play the patch. So it's interesting. And then shout out to you here, Elijah. Like, nah, I got the same three skins up here. I opened so many chests. I opened so many chests, and I got like three of these, and I got one of these. But I was happy with that one. But yeah, I wanted like a board or something, just anything more. But the chests themselves don't have pretty high drop rates for the coolest of cosmetics. But makes you open more chests. I ain't gonna complain too much about it. And then Lolly here, after playing for 6 months, the season make you take a break. Man, I felt that. In the middle portions of the season, definitely needed to take a break. I took like a week off, and for me, again, I'm creating content for this game that's a long time, and getting back in the swing of it too kind of felt difficult. I'm not gonna lie. I also realized that internally, I wanted to. Um, I really wanted to hit legend in every time that I am in the bazaar. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, that makes me want to just play the same builds that I know are good. But the way that I have the most fun in the games is actually just trying out different things. So I kind of have like this contradiction that's inside of me that it's like, well, I want to hit legend because I want to feel good that I did something impactful or important to me, and I want to also prove that I can do it. I want to display my skills. That's something that I know is important to me when taking inventories. Like, I want to display my skills for other people. I want to show people that I'm good at something, and that makes me feel good and validated. But it's completely at odds with like the actual journey part. And this is where I'm kind of like going back and realizing, okay, if we're going to enjoy the journey of this process, we really need to have some fun with this thing, or else we're going to burn out and it's going to be a slog. So, when I see your comment there, I'm like, yeah, no, I felt that and continue to feel that. And I realize that going into season three, things are going to look a little bit different about what I want from this game and what my goals are with it. Obviously still love it and going to be creating content for it, but what that content looks like, obviously still over-explained sort of stuff, but stuff that is going to appeal more to what I enjoy from this game and not necessarily just like doing the same thing to prove that I can do it, if that makes sense. But either way, I appreciate you talking about that. From Gold Simp here, talking about being a season of learning, I also just love this comment, and we'll get into the replies here because I really appreciate your journey here. Being hard stuck at bronze and then having that free to play experience, but then, you're managing to reach into gold. That's super sick. Getting to gold is a really big accomplishment. And then, yeah, going free to play and also grinding for the heroes, like, that's a really good feeling. I know when I did that, it was like, okay, I really earned something here, and I earned something that meant something to me, and it changed the way that I played the game, and it just always a really positive feedback loop. So, for you to get a new hero and then for you to get these wins is super sick. So I love it. And just your comments about kind of like how interesting the journey was, and, talking about how Pig was pretty polarizing. I'll get into that, but I'll get into that in the comments. I want to talk to you more about this, but I appreciate you just kind of talking about your journey here. This was really awesome to see, and I appreciate you joining me here on the channel for this experience here. It's great to have folks like you kind of talking about your journey. And then lastly but not leastly here, Arcanix, great season for you, and you hit Diamond. Congratulations, that's awesome. I completely hear you when you're talking about losing some steam at the end of it. Man, I really, to get to Legend here, grinding to that point was my mental health in I want to say in relation to this game was not very high. It was a slog to say the least. And again, talking about that comment below about taking a break, like, I do really feel that and know that I need to have more fun with this game, and show you guys, the things that I want to, but I can find a happy balance between showing you what the meta is and also playing a game that I enjoy. But regardless from that, I loved seeing that you went through all the different phases of the builds, man. You capitalized off of what the meta was doing. You were, as you were kind of talking about here, adapting to what people were doing and finding the builds that countered the counter builds and countering the counters and the counters. It feels good. So yeah, love to see it. And again, congratulations on hitting Diamond. That's awesome. But yeah, overall, I really appreciate all you guys kind of chiming in here and talking about your experiences in season 2. And yeah, just overall looking forward to engaging with you guys as things progress. Now looking to the future and talking about season 3 and what I would like to see from that. I'm pretty happy with the balance of the patch right here, but I think what I want to see is them kind of, even if it is a bit dangerous at first, just make a lot of numbers tweaks, change a lot of the PvE monsters, find ways to make the game feel more fresh and interesting compared to the other seasons. They have been doing that, so I have no doubt that they'll continue to do that. I'm excited to see what expansion we get for Dooley here. They've spoiled a little bit of it, and it looks like they're like dinosaur themed and things of that nature, which is kind of cool. Or is that the Mac one? No, I'm pretty sure it's the Dooley one. Yeah, because yeah. Anyway, and then also Mac is going to get a new expansion, so we're going to see these two heroes from what it looks like, and maybe we'll see some for the others. I highly doubt it. I think they originally said at some point that they would be releasing more heroes in this time frame, but I have no idea what that's going to look like. New heroes completely changes the way that the Bazaar works anyway, so that'll be something fun to dive into when we get it. I thought that this Bazaar feature where we have like a weekly special and a daily special was, fun to see the different items, and it definitely made you want to log in each day. So that was kind of cool. I think most of all in the prize pass, like to see some variety, so that it's not just something interesting every 15 levels. This is, it's fine. It's how we unlock the expansions. But if just getting like a chest and a ticket and a chest and a ticket and a chest and a ticket, I don't know, you open like 1,000 chests and they have such a low drop rate of having something that you want anyway that it doesn't really feel that good. So I would love if there was some more variety in here. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, but just something to make me more interested about where the tracker goes. But I know a lot of games are kind of like on this same thing where they just do something every, arbitrary amount of levels, and everything in between is fillers, so that you really want to get the milestone and you're willing to pay and skip tiers and stuff to get there. But that is what it is. Yeah, otherwise, I think that if we can just switch up monsters and how that looks in the PvE, I really like where the XP system is at now. So it makes each XP you get more impactful, just because you have such fewer opportunities to get XP, that'd be pretty cool. Otherwise, the items and skills, the numbers that they tweak on that will be what they are. And I don't really have any specific requests. I like where the game is at. So I'm excited to see where they take it from here. And, I'd be kind of interested to see how they could change up merchants too. But overall, the gameplay loop is obviously very fun. And that's why we're all here playing the game. Regardless, I had a lot of fun in season 2, but definitely felt the burn a little bit. And excited for season 3 and what we can all accomplish there. But with that, I appreciate you guys joining me here for another episode of the Bazaar Overexplained. I guess this is kind of a unique one. I haven't done this before, but just this whole overview of where the seasons have been at. It's been a fun journey, and if you didn't get on the post but you want to still talk about what season 2 was like for you, feel free to put it up in the comments below, and I will definitely respond back to you, as that's what I enjoy doing. But regardless, I am the Bazaar Whisperer. I appreciate you joining me here, and I'll see you in the next one.